Well, people these days are talking a lot about the church dying and how do we reach millennials? Is there any relevance to the church in this day and age? And I guess my response to that is that we have the tools we need to introduce people to Jesus. The church has been introducing people to Jesus for 2,000 years. And it's not about trying to update things with a hip new coffee shop or about having a pastor who wears skinny jeans and like ironic t-shirts. It's about communion and confession and baptism. It's about the sacraments of the church that we've been practicing for 2,000 years.
That doesn't, you mean reach? That doesn't sound evangelistic. How do you reach somebody through that stuff?
Oh, well, like the table. That when you think about communion and you think about how this is Christ's table, it's not my table, it's not my denomination's table, it's not your table, it's Christ's table. And anyone who is hungry is welcome to that table. Jesus makes the invitation list, not us. I think that's deeply appealing to people who long for communion with God, with their neighbor, and even with their enemies. The table has been and always will be one of the most powerful and countercultural truths of Christianity, and one of the most powerful aspects of church life. And it's something that I've kind of recently rediscovered. Growing up, we took communion maybe, I don't know, once a month, and it was nothing wrong with the grape juice and the little oyster crackers, but it was just something, it wasn't central to what it meant to be part of the church. And now I've kind of just been rediscovering lately how critical communion is to the life of the church. And so now we're part of a church family that practices communion, eats from the table every single Sunday. And what I love about that is I never come home from church and say, well, I just didn't feel fed by the pastor today. I'm fed every single Sunday by the body and blood of Christ. And that shows up every Sunday, and that's enough every Sunday. And I find that really beautiful because it's not about a service or a pastor or a choir or a band that impresses me and tries to sell me another product. The gospel is not a product to be sold. It's just about gathering around that table, recognizing my need and my neighbor's need, even my priest's need, and eating from the bread of life, which is given for the life of the world. I just find that really beautiful and really powerful every single time. So I was once asked by a group of Methodists to speak at a Methodist youth retreat. So this was going to be for junior high and high school students, about 500 junior high and high school students. And this is not really my typical group, my typical readers, my typical demographic, if you will. So I was a little nervous about it. And I reworked all of my talks and worried over the material. And before every single session, I prayed, God, just help me to do right by these kids. Help me to do right by these kids. Help me to do right by these kids. Just help me to not screw this up. And it went okay. I gave my talks. Only a few of them slept through them. It wasn't a complete disaster. But after I did my presentations, I was asked by the Methodists to help serve communion at this event. And this was my first time ever serving communion. I had received it many times, but I had never served the bread and the wine. And so I was tasked with handing out the bread to 500 high school and junior high students. And as each one came by, I put this piece of bread in their cupped hands. And that's that position of having your hands held together, cupped, ready to receive, is a very vulnerable and one of the most sacred positions a person can have. And so I as all of these junior high and high school students came up to me, I put this piece of bread in their hand and I said, "This is Christ's body broken for you. This is Christ's body broken for you. This is Christ's body broken for you." And I said it to the ones who were laughing in line with their friends, to the ones who had tears streaming down their faces. I said it to the ones who I could tell were probably the class clowns, to the ones I could tell probably got picked on in school. This is Christ's body broken for you. This is Christ's body broken for you. And I said it to the ones who were wearing designer jeans, the ones who showed up in their pajamas, to the ones with mischievous grins, to the ones who I could just tell were wrestling with doubts, with questions. This is Christ's body broken for you. This is Christ's body broken for you. And after I said it about 500 times, I finally got it. Oh, this is enough. This body and this blood is enough. It's not about me doing right by these kids. It's not about me impressing them. It's about getting out of the way and letting Jesus do his thing. They weren't waiting on me. Jesus was present, Jesus was there, and Jesus was enough. And that was a really powerful experience for me, serving communion for the first time and recognizing that my insufficiency is kind of the point. Right, I wasn't up to the task, but Christ was up for the task. It wasn't about me doing right by these kids, it was about Christ having already done right by them on the cross. And so that was a really powerful experience of giving communion to people. And then there's also the other side of receiving communion. And at my church, we receive communion on our knees with our hands cupped together. And the priest comes by and puts the bread in our hands and says, "The body of Christ, bread of heaven." And that position of being on your knees with your hands cupped together, waiting to receive, is a difficult position for somebody like me to assume, because it's an expression of how my need, my helplessness. It's being ready to receive. And sometimes I like to think that I've got it all together and it's my job to give. But receiving communion reminds me of how desperately I need God, how desperately I need grace, how desperately I need the people kneeling next to me, even if we don't get along, even if I might perceive them to be my enemies. So having both given communion and received communion, I see it as this beautiful, powerful, and sufficient means of grace. It's an outward sign of inward grace, and it is always and ever enough. The body and blood of Christ is enough. I think the problem is sometimes we just tend to get in our own way. We make it all about ourselves. We try to impress people. We try to make it about theology. We try to make it about doctrine and denominationalism and our screwed up notions of who's in and who's out. And we get in the way of Christ and the table. And so I think the main thing is to learn to get out of the way and let God move, to keep in mind that what makes the gospel offensive isn't who it keeps out. It's not who it keeps away from the table, it's who it invites in. That's always been what makes the gospel powerful and countercultural and frankly offensive. So yeah, that's how communion has been working on me, wearing down my pride, wearing down my grudges, my hostility, slowly but surely.